People, it's been all right. The weather's been worse today, but you know, we all need to get out more. But not right now. Only in an hour. In an hour, you can do what you want, because we're going to talk about. We're going to meet Kathryn. And the best thing about meeting Kathryn is always behind the scenes, pressing all the buttons on events like this and making it all happen and telling me how it works. And when Kerry and I go, can we do this? Like, as our resident, what did you call a WallCAP wizard, or young person, as I'd like to call her, she just makes it happen, and it just kind of does, and you never see her. So that's Kathryn, and you're going to hear from her tonight, and I'm really pleased that you are, because she's an absolute genius in that sort of sense. And so she did give me a job title, but I'm going to stick with Genius WallCAP Wizard, and that's the job title from now onwards, right? But before we start that, there are a few housekeeping things. I'm going to keep you all muted through the talk so Kathryn can talk, but she's told me that she's kept the talk quite short so that she can have lots of time for questions and answers and all that sort of stuff later on. If you've got any questions as it goes on, pop them in the chat. And the other thing was, we've had quite a substantial break for those of us that have been on all day since the last talk and this talk, and I'm sure, like me, you've been and looked at the news. And it's horrific and mesmerizing, the events that are happening in the world at this moment in time, and they're really happening while we're sat here on this show, on this talk, if you like. And I'm a bit sort of blown away by that. I just wanted to collectively acknowledge that this thing's happening while we know all these things that have happened in history, and we're discussing history and we're discussing world heritage. I don't have any clever answers. I just wanted to acknowledge that it was happening, because we've spent all day not doing that. And I've just been down and looked at the news. I don't have any clever answers. I just wanted to acknowledge it. My response is that there's never been a more important time to be a World Heritage Site. And there's never been a more important time to look after that World Heritage Site for all the people that we've discussed this week, locally, nationally, internationally. I don't know what more to say. I just wanted to say that's my response to it, because I needed to say that it is happening, and we've not this week, if that makes sense to anybody out there. But I want us to jump. We're going to talk about this more tomorrow with David Brough at 12:30. Please join us for that conversation, because I think it's incredibly important. There has never been a bigger time to share the World Heritage Site with the world. So I just wanted to throw that in there. I just wanted to say it, and now we can carry on with the evening. Sorry, Kathryn, but I'm sure it's affected all of us as we've gone through the evening and on through the last week, even in that sense. So without any further ado, Kathryn, would you like to share your screen and take us through the Hadrian's Wall GIS system?
Yes, we'll do that now. All right, is that all working?
That's great. Thank you, Kathryn.
Excellent.
Over to you.
Thank you. Well, thank you everyone for joining us again this evening. Tonight I'll be presenting the Hadrian's Wall WallGIS that has been built and populated by WallCAP. I'll provide some background information about the GIS and go over the structure of the underlying geodatabase before running through a number of maps to highlight what the WallGIS can be used for. So the 80 Roman miles of Hadrian's Wall are now split between 3 counties, numerous heritage organizations and sites, and hundreds of landowners. Information about the history and archaeology of the wall and all of its features can be found in the archives, museums, scheduled monument listings, and HERs that cover the length of the wall, as well as over 100 years of excavation reports, antiquarian diaries and letters, historic mapping, countless books and publications, and local knowledge. This is a vast amount of data, and more is constantly being added as further excavation and research takes place. While it's fantastic that there's such a large volume of information about the wall, it can be difficult for researchers and the public to track it down and access it all, as it's spread across so many different sources. One of the main outputs of the WallCAP project aims to bring a large amount of this information together into one place with the creation of the wall-wide WallGIS. The WallGIS primarily consists of an underlying geodatabase, which holds descriptive information, spatial data, and other attribute options to capture the characteristics of the wall and its features. And I'll go through this in more detail in a few moments. This geodatabase will be linked to GIS files that can be displayed in mapping software, allowing users to run spatial analysis or create maps using the data. Before I launch into all of the details about the WallGIS, I thought it would be good to just give you a quick overview of what GIS actually is. GIS stands for Geographical Information System, and this is a system that creates, manages, analyzes, and maps different types of data. Essentially, you can add a bunch of different types of data, like elevation data, aerial photos, old maps, site locations, rivers, etc., to the system. Each of these is a layer, and together they create a representation of the real world. All that data can then be run through a variety of analysis processes, and the results of that analysis or the original data can then be turned into maps and other visualizations. The other term that I will be mentioning quite a bit is a geodatabase. This is simply a database that contains information, but also has spatial or geographic data attached. This allows the database to be connected and used within a GIS. The database is made up of a series of connected data tables, which together hold all of the information about the various features of Hadrian's Wall. And that should, those data tables we'll see in a few minutes, and that will hopefully all sort of make sense and come together. So the first stage of research and data collection for the WallGIS was done by the wonderful WallCAP volunteers during lockdown in 2020 and 2021. We designed a standardized data collection form for each type of wall feature, which ensured that all of the specific characteristics of that feature were collected, and also provided free text spaces to add extra information. Our volunteers completed desk-based research and filled out these forms for each turret, milecastle, and individual mile of wall curtain, vallum, and north ditch. The WallGIS is still a work in progress, and I'm currently completing the second stage of research. I'm working through the volunteer gathered data, completing quality control checks, and entering it all into the database. I'm also conducting more detailed research and filling in any gaps in the data from our volunteers. There are currently almost 500 records representing wall features in the database. Stage 3 is data collection, stage 3 of the data collection will incorporate or link other data sets into the database. Much of this data will come from WallCAP stone sourcing and dispersal activities, and that includes data on reused Roman stone and petrographic analysis of stone samples from a variety of locations along the wall, as well as other geological data and information about quarries. Some of the main sources of information for the wall features has been Archaeology Aliana, transactions of the Cumberland and Westmoreland Antiquarian and Archaeological Society, scheduled monument records and excavation reports, commercial excavation reports, Roman inscriptions of Britain, and many, many other sources. Results from recent WallCAP excavations will also be incorporated into the records as reports are completed in the coming months. We are using a wide variety of mapping data to add to the WallGIS, and so this is what sits in the background and sort of gives us that context for where all the sites are sitting in the landscape. So some of the base mapping data that we've gathered includes high-resolution digital terrain models, LiDAR data, aerial and satellite imagery from a range of years, and this allows us to check for crop marks and earthworks that show up at different times depending on when the photos are taken, and under what kind of conditions they're taken, as well as including current ordnance survey maps. We also have geophysical and other surveys that WallCAP have completed at our project sites, the results of which have been incorporated at those locations. We're also incorporating historic mapping into the WallGIS, and this is particularly useful in the built-up urban areas where the line of Hadrian's Wall isn't as clear. We have high-resolution scan of McLaughlin's survey of the wall, as well as the 1749 Debig and Campbell survey, and an early Benwell estate map that shows the location of the fort and other features in that area. Historic ordnance survey maps have also been quite useful to see the change in our knowledge of the wall over time, as more details about the wall and surrounding features were added with each updated edition of the maps. These maps don't even have to be that old, as the 1970s edition of the OS map was quite useful for WallCAP work that we did in Port Carlisle. We would like to add more historic maps to the WallGIS, but COVID closures of the archives in the last 2 years has made it difficult to do that. So we're hoping that we'll be able to access and scan more of these maps in the coming months. So I'll now go through the Wall geodatabase, the WallGIS geodatabase in a bit more detail. The geodatabase is based in Microsoft Access, and all of the tables and forms that we're using were custom designed and built by Alex Turner, our digital heritage officer. The database was designed with many attribute options, and this allows us to capture all of the varied characteristics and fine details of the wall. Each feature starts with a record in the core data table, which captures all of the basic details of that feature. So there's an example of this on the screen right now, and this is for mile 52 of the curtain wall. So you can see that there are options to select the type of geometry for the feature, and this is how it will be displayed in the GIS. So in this case, it's a polyline, so it's a line to represent the curtain wall. And there's also options to have higher level location data, like the administrative authority, district, and parish for that feature. We can link to Historic England scheduled monument records, indicate what types of dating evidence exist for that feature and what types of artifacts have been found, if there are any, and what the monument type of that feature is. Dating information is captured as broad periods and then as more specific start and end dates. The summary box is free text, and this allows us to add summaries of scheduling information, excavations, and any other sources that exist for that feature or that section of the feature. And then almost most importantly, below that, there's space to list the references. And then finally, we capture information about the condition of the wall. And there's some free text again there to provide more details about the state of the feature that's in that record. So once that sort of basic core data table record has been created for a feature and has been filled in with as much detail as is available, there are feature-specific tables that need to be completed as well. So the image on the left is the curtain wall data table. We have added options to capture information and details about the width and height of the curtain in each wall mile. And in this case, this is mile 34. There are a variety of options for wall width, foundation type, and construction material. We also have the facing stone, the core stone, decorative stone, and culvert bridge boxes, and these are all free text. You can add in as much sort of detail that you can find about those aspects of the curtain in that mile. And then there's also options to add plan, elevation, and section drawings and photos for that record. On the right is the turret data table. This captures information about the door position, measurements for the turret itself, as well as the distance from previous and next sites along the wall, and information about the foundation and construction materials. And again, we can attach images and drawings of the feature. These are the data tables for the ditch and milecastles. I'm currently working my way through the milecastles and have started on the ditch records. So these records are a little bit less complete than the curtain wall and the turret records at the moment. But these images show the level of detail that we're capturing for each of the features. The milecastle table is quite similar to the turrets table, with the addition of options to capture information about the milecastle and gate types for that feature. The ditch table is capturing measurements and information about the profile of the ditch and details about the berm between the wall and the ditch, including whether or not there's any defensive features that have been found on the berm in that wall mile. The last of the main feature tables are for the vallum and forts. And again, I haven't added data to these tables yet, but we'll be working on them soon. The vallum table is primarily capturing measurements between each of the features that make up the vallum. The forts are a much more complicated feature along the wall, and it took us quite some time to work out how we were going to capture that information in the sort of most kind of in as much detail as we could, but also making it as efficient as possible. And so we decided on a slightly more simplified option to select from a drop-down list all of the building types that have been found within the fort and in the surrounding extramural settlements And there's also a free text box to add summaries of excavations and other details where they're needed, and that's not being captured by the drop-down options. So now that we've gone over the background and structure of the database, I thought I would run through some examples of the types of queries that will be possible once the WallGIS is complete. As the WallGIS is still a work in progress, there is still data to be added and joined to the database. So the following maps are some of the more simple queries that we can ask of the system at the moment. But once complete, more complex multi-attribute queries will be possible, and the results of that can then be extracted and visualized as maps and things like that. So I thought I would start with sort of right at the basic level of what information we have. And so looking at the location of our turrets, looking at the confirmed sites, which are those that have been found through excavation, survive as earthworks, or survive as outstanding remains. Comparing that to the sites that are assumed locations. And these are sites that rely on the regular intervals of the structures on the wall, and their locations are based only on measurements from other confirmed wall features. So there are 81 assumed turret sites marked in blue, and 83 confirmed sites marked in yellow, and then there's one unknown turret, and that's turret 4A, which has not been assigned an assumed location. And is somewhere under Newcastle. So even with this simple visualization, we can start to see some patterns. And so we can see that we know almost nothing about the turrets under urban Newcastle, and then very little is known of the turrets going west from mile 57. So this next map shows the condition of the turret remains. Upstanding consolidated sites are in blue, buried features are in yellow, earthwork sites in green, and then the two turrets that were destroyed by late 19th and early 20th century quarrying are in orange. Each of the turrets had a doorway in its southern wall. The excavated sites have shown that this is placed at either the eastern end, which is shown in green, or the western end, which is shown in blue, of that southern wall. So of course, we don't know the layout of the assumed sites. But the doorway location is also unknown in many of the confirmed turret sites because those turrets have either not been fully excavated, they're only known by earthwork remains, or not enough of the south wall survived above the foundation level to indicate where the doorway would have been located. So we just don't have that information. So now moving on to milecastles, we're back to our confirmed sites versus our assumed sites. We have a much more complete picture of the milecastles along Hadrian's Wall compared to the turrets, with 58 confirmed sites and 21 assumed sites. However, we can still see that pattern where we have a gap in our knowledge of the milecastles at the western end of the wall. Here we can see the condition of the milecastle remains. The vast majority survive as buried features or earthworks, and there are actually only 7 milecastles that have upstanding consolidated remains, and those are shown in blue. Those upstanding sites are all located in the central section of the wall where we have the best preservation. The milecastles have a north and a south gate, and these features have different levels of survival in the archaeological record. So we have no data about the gates at 49 of the milecastles. And so that includes the assumed sites, so the ones that we don't know for sure the location of them, as well as those that either haven't been fully excavated or no gates survived in the archaeological record. So of those remaining, we have information about only the north gate for 11 milecastles, both the north and south gates for 12 milecastles, and then only the south gate for 7 milecastles. The next few maps are where we can start getting into more of the detailed data. And I'm starting to kind of combine a few of the different attribute options to make up these maps. So now that we know which of the gates have survived in the archaeological record, these can be broken down into the different stylistic types, with each style linked to the construction teams from different regions. So type 1 is marked in green, type 2 in blue, type 3 in yellow, and type 4 in orange. Type 2 and type 4 are variations on the same design, but type 2 is associated with the narrow wall, and type 4 is associated with the broad wall. And then just below the map, I've included some images of those different gate types just to kind of give you an idea of how they differ. So this map looks at the axis type of each of the milecastles. So long axis milecastles, those are represented by a vertical rectangle on the map. So these have a longer north-south measurement of that site. The short axis milecastles is represented by a horizontal rectangle, and they have a shorter north-south measurement. Of the confirmed milecastles, 33 are long axis and 13 are short axis. There's also one milecastle doesn't fit into these two categories, and that is milecastle 79 out at the west end of the wall. And that has equal north, south, and east-west measurements. So it's a square, and that's what you can see on the map. I thought it would be interesting to combine those previous two milecastle attributes and then look at the intersection between the milecastle gate types and axis types. So this map is a little bit more complicated, but I'll walk you through it. So the axis type is shown by the shape of the milecastle on the map. So again, vertical rectangles for the long axis and horizontal rectangles for short axis. And then the gate type is represented by color. A few trends to highlight. The majority of the type 1 gates are short axis milecastles. The only recorded type 2 and type 4 gates are on long axis milecastles. And the majority of type 3 gates are on long axis milecastles as well. There are also quite a few milecastles where we have been able to determine the axis type, but we don't know the gate type. And so now we'll move on to the curtain wall itself. So this map highlights the 27 wall miles that contain a length of upstanding consolidated wall, and those are marked in blue. This includes miles that are very short lengths of consolidated curtain, like the couple of meters of upstanding wall that's in mile 79, as well as the longer lengths, like the entirety of mile 48. So the miles marked in yellow survive only as buried features or an earthwork mound. No trace of the 2 miles across Rough Marsh towards the western end of the wall have ever been found. So these sections remain unknown and they're marked in white. So the final map I wanted to share with you shows the changes to stone wall construction widths along the length of the wall. The widths shown for each mile represent the width of the majority of that mile. If we zoomed in closer, there may be more localized changes to the width within each mile, but these are not visible when looking at the entire length of the wall. The broad wall, narrow wall, and intermediate wall are each found in 15 wall miles. 17 wall miles have broad wall foundations with narrow curtain wall built on top. And then there are 3 wall miles that have broad wall foundations with narrow curtain, and then have the additional extra narrow curtain wall built on top of that. And those are marked in red just to highlight them. Those 3 miles are found in areas where we have some of the best preservation of the wall. And it's likely that this construction sequence would have been seen elsewhere along the wall, but we just don't have that surviving today. So now that you've seen the potential of the WallGIS, what's happening with it next? The first step will be to finish populating all of the records before it goes through another round of quality control checks. Then we need to incorporate data that is being captured in the stone sourcing and dispersal branch of WallCAP, other geological data, and more of the mapping data into the database. And once that's all done, it will then all get packaged all together, and it will be made freely available to members of the public and researchers alike. The Archaeological Data Service will be storing and hosting the WallGIS, and that is where it can be accessed and downloaded in the future. So a lot of work has gone into the creation of the WallGIS. And while I've been putting together this presentation, it has been really good to see it kind of start coming to life with some of the more simple queries and visualizations that can be generated using the data. All of us at WallCAP are very excited to see what the Hadrian's Wall community is going to do with the WallGIS in the coming years. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Kathryn. I'm sure there's a round of applause in there with everybody, either virtually or by hand. So I'm, as you know, and I've already said that today when we talked about data in an earlier conversation, I think the potential for the Hadrian's Wall GIS is immense in terms of our understanding and operation. It's not that we don't have data, it's just that we have lots of data in lots of random places, and the opportunity to bring it all together in one central place is going to be phenomenal. And particularly when we can link it later on, and we talked earlier on today, didn't we, about how we might link it with non-heritage data and bus data and talk about access points and all that sort of stuff to see whether we can draw any conclusions from that. People were listening intently. I was looking through the screen, going backwards and forwards, and everybody was really sort of looking and studying the maps that you were putting up there, Kathryn. There was an awful lot of detail on there.
Yeah, I'm happy to share them again if anyone wants to have a closer look at any of those maps. Just let me know.
Exactly, we could put them back up on the screen, but also there's nothing in the chat that I need to bring up. So if anybody wants to ask Kathryn any questions about specific things that she's spoken about, the maps that she's shown, how the queries might work, how the later GIS release might work and how you might access it, then now's your chance. Raise a hand, make yourself known. Lee, go for it.
Sorry, this is from a completely geeky perspective, but so are the graphic images stored in the Access database as well?
So the maps no, so those aren't going to be stored in the database itself, but those will be available. We're going to release a whole bunch of maps sort of under Creative Commons license at the end of the project as well. So I'm sure those will end up kind of getting placed with those, or in publications and things, they'll be available that way. But it will be, when it's sort of released at the end, it will be available to download the files so people can take them and do what they want with them. But there also will be sort of an online map visualization of the database, and you'll be able to query the database online as well. So if you're not a GIS user, if you don't want to deal with software, you'll still be able to kind of have a look at all the records and play with them a little bit online.
So is it actual like paths to the images that are stored in the database?
Not the maps, but not the maps themselves, but like there will be like an online map showing the whole, like all of the records and stuff like that. Yeah.
Sorry, one last.
Go for it.
One last geeky question. You're saying there's a lot more to put in there. Mm-hmm. And as far as I'm aware, there's a 2 gig access database limit, I think. What happens if you bust that limit?
I think, well, they sort of charge by file and also by size. So I think we just pay them more money. I don't know. I'm not sure exactly. We're still sort of, because the sort of discussions with Archaeological Data Service happened earlier on in the project before I was on the team, when my predecessor Nikki was in post. And so Rob and stuff know, and Alex know the sort of details of that. And I'm kind of, now that we're getting into that process where we're going to start getting things to ADS, the Archaeological Data Service, now I'm kind of catching up with those conversations. So I'm not sure exactly how that's going to work, but it's been sort of sorted because they know that this is going to be a pretty big project. There's a really good example on ADS already of what we're hoping to do. So that's it's a different project. It's the Rural Settlements of Britain project. And sort of, if you want to have a look at that on the ADS website, then that's kind of what we're aiming to have on there as well. So that's also another massive project because that covered all of, I can't remember if it was England only, or if it was all of the UK, I can't remember, but another really big project. So we'll have something similar to that, hopefully.
Okay, thank you.
Lee, equally, I think as we broaden out the users for it by bringing in non-sector non-heritage data, if you like. If we bring in management data, we open it up to a much wider audience, and there's greater potential for us to find funding to increase the capacity, I suppose, in that sense. So I'm very keen to try and broaden the bandwidth of user as much as possible so that we can broaden the appeal, I suppose, and maybe pick up some of those bills and they're not just landing at the research sector letterbox, you know. In that
I think you can link multiple access databases together to break that 2 GB link. But
there were a couple of hands up. Anne, you've had your hand up for a while now. Was there a question?
There was, but I'm unstable, John, as you know, so my broadband might go down. I was wondering, is there potential in the end for having things like archive photos added to the GIS? You know, like old photos of digs of things that have been either knocked down or covered over, or is that not a goer?
So I've got where there's sort of excavation photos and things like that. I have been attaching those sorts of images to the records. Again, we're sort of trying to figure out what we're going to do with that, if those will be able to go to ADS, just because, again, those will be individual files that are also connected, but the references are all included in the database, so you can kind of find them. I think going as far as adding in archived images directly to this database is probably beyond the scope of what we're doing, but that's one of the things that could be done as another project, or, you know, the archives will be able to use the data to do that themselves and have that link kind of set up a bit more. So again, this is kind of, it's the basis for, like, there's so many different things that can be done with this, and people have probably wanted to do, but it's just trying to have all that data in one place. Just hasn't, this has been something Rob's wanted done for years. And so it's finally kind of just WallCAP had the capacity to do that. And so I think it's going to be the start of a lot of really interesting projects going forward.
For sure, for sure.
Exciting.
Minnie's iPad, who I know is Alistair behind the pseudonym. You've had your hand up as well, and so if I can come to you next, and then we'll go into the chat because a few questions have popped there. So, Alistair.
Right, a couple of questions, Kathryn. One of which was probably how long is a piece of string sort of question, but have you got a potential launch date for the database? I would like to use it as soon as possible, really. And secondly, you mentioned about how you'd got detail for each wall mile, but you said something like you'd be able to go down within a wall mile and look at different foundation areas where foundation is visible, or whether there's standing wall and those sorts of things. That's something you haven't quite got to yet, but, or have you?
Yeah, so some of that data, because we've got some limitations within the database as well, because you can only, you know, we could go on and on and on as far as capturing data, and we have to sort of limit it at some point. And so there's some limitations to that, but if there's changes in sort of wall width, or like part of a wall mile is above ground and part of it's below ground, like all of that is captured in the records. And so it will be there as far as the information. Yeah, so I haven't quite got there as far as displaying that. As far as launching the database, obviously it will have to happen before the end of September, because that's when WallCAP is finished. We don't have an exact date yet, because it'll kind of depend on when I can get things done. So hopefully the aim is to have it kind of all of the data collection and entry done, sorry, sort of March, April. So I've got sort of the next month, 6 weeks to kind of get that done, which is a bit daunting. But then we've got to go through our sort of various other processes before we get there. It's going to have, we want, you know, I'm doing quality control checks on data that's come into us, but I also would like people to look at.
Oh, Kathryn, where have you gone? Do you think that's the time? That's the only time we have.
Really exciting about into that.
There she is. She's back. She's back.
Oh,
you froze for quite a while there, Kathryn.
Oh, I did. Oh no, I'm sorry. Okay, where did you lose me? I had no idea. Everyone was still moving, so I had no idea.
I think you were. Sorry, Alistair.
Yeah,
But,
just to conclude, when I retired 3 years or so ago, I thought well, it'd be an interesting project to see which bits of the wall are broad, which bits are narrow, which bits are intermediate. And I looked at it and I thought, my God, that is an absolutely impossibly big project to do. So I can kind of get some impression of the amount of information that you've had to wade through, and it's extraordinarily impressive. And I'm certainly looking forward to getting my hands on this database with all the material that you've put in. So thank you very much to you and all the people who've worked on it. I think that's all I need to say.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been, it's definitely been a bit of a slog to go through. Like, I've really enjoyed it, but again, it's kind of almost a never-ending project. And I'm doing this alongside all of the other work that I'm doing with the project. And so it's been really interesting, but it's definitely been nice putting together these maps and starting to see it kind of come together, because it's showing me what the possibility of what it can actually, what it's going to become. And it's not just a bunch of tables and database stuff. It is going to be something much bigger than that. So yeah, so it's going to be really exciting.
Thanks very much.
No problem. Let's go into the chat, because Philip, you were talking about the fact that you walked the wall in 1977 and didn't remember quite so much. Upstanding wall. So have we restored any bits? In a way, yes, some parts have become uncovered and consolidated, because I know that I was involved in a project about 6 years ago where we took some quite substantial lengths, and they were at risk, so they were uncovered and consolidated. So now would classify as standing monument at this particular moment in time, rather than covered monument. But not in any great manner, but yeah, there is some addition to that. Yes, I couldn't quantify that for you at this moment in time, and certainly not after a very long day on Zoom in that sort of sense. But there will be data and there will be reports. Kathryn, did you want to add to that? I presume
you probably know better than I do. So.
Yeah. We used some CETA money last time, which was used around Asica and all that sort of area. So we did some consolidation work in that sort of area, and Bertolt Beck and so forth. Let's now move down. There is a bunch of questions that are very technical. I'm going to look at them, and I'm going to pretend that I know what most of those words mean, and then I'm going to say, Kathryn, have you seen those comments in the chat about access and all that sort of stuff? And what would you like to say about that?
So Lee, this is what you were hinting at earlier with the 2 gig file limit in Access or ADS. Yeah, so Access does have a limit. I've got a lot of data in the system at the moment, and we're still under 1 gig, so we've got lots of space to go still. Hopefully we don't run out. But yeah, at the moment we're okay, and it might just come down to saving the photo files somewhere else and then adding them in later or something like that. That might be the way around that if we're running out of space. So we'll sort that out. It is an SQL. This is getting really technical. Coding language. It is an SQL based database, but yes, it's just kind of sitting in Access to make it a bit easier to use. Yes, and sorry.
But Kathryn, my takeaway from this is that there are quite a few people within our community I think you can have a conversation with at any given point should you need some technical assistance.
Yes.
That's what I'm taking away from this. No, also, do you have to pay a subscription per annum to host or to host the GIS in that sort of sense? I'm thinking about it like I do for the website for Hadrian's Wall.
With the Archaeological Data Service.
Yeah.
So I think we pay up front, and then the agreement is that they then host and maintain it. Like so they won't be adding data to it, but it will be live and accessible, and they will do any conversions as sort of technology changes in the future, if anything like that happens. So it will kind of exist in perpetuity with them in that sort of form. That's the one thing at the moment, is that with WallCAP finishing, the database will be in, so say we're done in August 2022, we're gonna have to put in the data that's the database and all of the information we have up to that point. Obviously, anything that happens beyond that point won't be in the system. So at some point in the future, someone will have to come in and kind of add new excavation reports and any new research and things like that into the system. And this is one of the things that we're kind of discussing now as far as sort of what's the future of the database. So it will always be accessible, but whether or not it's going to get updated is kind of the question. And that's sort of one of the issues with having these project funding cycles, is that we're going to get the project done, but then what happens?
And I think to reiterate that, your last sentence, Lee, which is, but I'm guessing this might be down to budget as well, is absolutely true, which is why I'm sort of saying, if we can get things like trail data in there, cycle data in there, bus data in there, I bring in more budgets that we can maybe mine to make sure that we can keep it live and up to date and accurate, once we've proven that it's a useful management tool outside of the archaeological circle. Because at the moment it's this project and the research world that would pick up the bill. I see that it's got legs in terms of the much wider heritage community that we've talked about all week in the different services and parts of the World Heritage Site. A little bit of everybody's budget goes a long way to making this a really useful tool if we can prove that that's the case. So that's my hope, to make it as broad as possible so that many more users see the value in it and we can make it live for as long as possible in that sense. And Bob, you were asking, is there a plan to have the GIS as part of a display at each of the museums?
So there's no set plans yet. Again, the main part of this is just getting all of the information into one place and getting it together. But it will be available to anyone who wants to use it afterwards. And so that would be kind of a conversation to be having as far as how do the museums want to use it? How do local authorities and the management plan and all of these people, how are they going to use that information? And so it is definitely something that could be part of a display, but kind of beyond the scope of what WallCAP's going to be doing with it.
I think it can sit behind all of those documents and all of those exhibitions. We just heard from Rob in a previous section about exhibitions developed by WallCAP, and the data from that can drive some of the content for those exhibitions, definitely, and exhibitions are all along the wall in that sense. There's a bunch more talk about the technicalities of the database in there. We're going to capture all that content in the chat, and I know that, as I say, Kathryn, I think you've got some allies there in the data world that
yes.
we can jump on, which is incredibly important to have. As I say, Hadrian's Wall has so much data spread across so many different places that a lot of the time we don't know where it is, even though we know it exists. So it's just a bit of a mess. And this is an opportunity to bring it all together in a usable hub.
Yeah.
Are there any more questions now we come out of the chat? Any more questions while we've got Kathryn here? She's not normally in front of the camera, so it's a great opportunity to ask.
We just missed one comment earlier, and it's from Phil about the colors of the map.
Oh,
data.
Sorry about that. Yeah, go Kathryn, sorry.
So that's great to know that the colors weren't quite working, because I was trying to pick things that might work, and I know which map you're talking about with the different wall widths that were all different colors, and I just was running out of colors. But those maps that I created with and the colors that are seen there are just ones that I made for the presentation. It's not how the data is going to be shown in the sort of final iteration. And again, we'll be having all sorts of conversations about how best to display that so that it's accessible and visible to everyone. So, but that's good to know. I'll note that and I'll make some changes for future stuff. So thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. If that's all that we've got, then thank you very much, Kathryn, for your time and your explanation of something which is really quite complicated, and you made it seem so simple in a way, and the benefits thereof. So once again, a round of applause for Kathryn, if we may.